My brother called me irresponsible at my own kitchen table. He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, casually, between bites of the lasagna I had made, with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been challenged. My mother nodded from the other end of the table. My father looked at his plate, and my brother Noel smiled at his phone before setting it face down, like the conversation wasn't worth his full attention. I was 31 years old. I had just driven 4 hours from Edmonton to spend Thanksgiving weekend at my parents' house in Red Deer. I had brought groceries, cleaned the kitchen, fixed the leaking tap under the sink that had been dripping since March, and made dinner for 6 people. And somewhere between the garlic bread and the dessert, my brother decided to explain to everyone at the table that I didn't understand how to manage money. I remember staring at the condensation ring my glass had left on the tablecloth and thinking quietly that I had transferred $1,100 into my parents' account exactly 9 days earlier. Hydro bill, my mother had said, just until things settled down. Things had been settling down for 4 years. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just passed the salad and changed the subject. That was something I had learned to do without thinking. Redirect, absorb, move on. Keep the peace. Smile at the right moments. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. It took me a long time to understand that keeping peace isn't the same thing as being loved. I grew up the older of 2 boys in a mid-sized city in Alberta. My father worked in oil and gas project coordination for most of my childhood, which meant good years and suddenly very bad years depending on things none of us understood. My mother worked part-time at a dental office and ran the house with a kind of quiet efficiency that I didn't appreciate until I had my own place and realized how much invisible labor that actually was. Noel was 4 years younger than me. From the time he was small, he had a way of making rooms turn toward him. Loud laugh, easy confidence, the kind of personality that adults called charming and teachers called a handful. My parents found him endlessly entertaining in a way they never quite found me. I was steady, reliable. The kind of kid who did his homework without being asked and who didn't cause scenes. I think they assumed that meant I didn't need much. They were wrong about that. But I didn't know how to tell them, so I didn't. By the time I was 19, I had a part-time job at a hardware store and was taking night courses in accounting while my classmates went to university full-time on their parents' dime. By 22, I had moved to Edmonton for a position at a mid-sized logistics firm. Entry-level, nothing glamorous, but steady work with room to move up. I shared a 2-bedroom apartment with a co-worker named Patrick for the first 2 years, because I couldn't afford anything on my own. I ate a lot of rice and canned soup and told myself it was temporary. Noel, meanwhile, dropped out of his first college program after 1 semester and moved back home. My parents redid his bedroom. They bought him a used car so he could look for work more easily. He found a bartending job, quit after 6 weeks because of a conflict with the manager, found another one, and spent most weekends at the lake, with friends my parents referred to as his crowd, in a tone that somehow managed to be both worried and indulgent at the same time. The first time my mother called me asking for money, I was 24. My father's company had cut a round of contractors, and he was between projects. "The hydro bill," she said, "just until things settle down." Sent it. Of course I sent it. They were my parents. The second time was 3 months later, the third time was 2 months after that, and somewhere around the 5th or 6th transfer it stopped like an emergency and started feeling like a subscription. I want to be honest about something. I was not a saint in any of this. I didn't send money because I was noble. I sent it partly out of genuine love, and partly because saying no felt like a kind of failure, like admitting that I didn't care enough, wasn't generous enough, wasn't a good son. My parents had a way of making silence feel like accusation. My mother could deliver a single sigh through a phone receiver that weighed about 40 pounds, so I just kept sending. The amounts varied. Sometimes it was $400. Once it was nearly $3,000 when my father needed a procedure that his benefits didn't fully cover. I told myself that was a one-time thing. It wasn't. Over 4 years, working in financial analysis, I kept meticulous records without even really meaning to. Spreadsheets were just how my brain worked. I tracked my own budget obsessively because I had to. My savings never moved the way I wanted them to, and I couldn't figure out why until I sat down one Sunday evening and actually ran the numbers. $53,200. That was what I had transferred home over 4 years. I sat with that number for a long time. My apartment was a decent 1-bedroom in a quiet part of the city. Nothing fancy. I had 1 small vacation in 4 years, a long weekend in Banff that I had planned for 8 months and felt guilty about the entire time. My car was 11 years old and needed work I kept deferring. I had not yet managed to save enough for a down payment on anything, and Noel had just posted photos on Instagram of a trip to Mexico with his girlfriend. I want to be clear, I didn't know at that point exactly where my money was going. I assumed my parents were using it for what they said: bills, medication, the kind of small ongoing expenses that pile up when income is inconsistent. That was a reasonable assumption. It turned out to be wrong. The moment I started to understand what was actually happening came from a phone call I almost didn't answer. It was a Wednesday night in February. I had just finished a 10-hour shift and was eating leftovers standing up at my kitchen counter when my phone buzzed. My father. He didn't ask how I was. He never really did anymore. He just started talking. Something about a business idea Noel had come up with. Some kind of online resale operation. Needed some startup capital to get inventory. Just a loan, really. He'd pay it back. How much? I asked. There was a pause. Not a thinking pause. A bracing pause. 8,000. I remember the sound of a car passing on the street outside. I remember setting my fork down very carefully. $8,000 was almost exactly what I had managed to save in the past 14 months while deferring my car repairs and skipping my dentist appointment twice. And my father was asking for it for Noel's resale hobby. I need to think about it, I said. That was the first time I had ever said that instead of yes. My father's voice changed. Not dramatically. He didn't yell or threaten. He just became quieter in a specific way that had always made me feel like I had done something wrong without knowing what. He said he understood and hung up shortly after. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark of my apartment staring at the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not frustration, but something colder and more focused. I got up around 2 in the morning and opened my laptop. I work in financial analysis. Numbers are how I understand the world. So I started doing what I always do when something doesn't make sense. I looked at the data. I pulled 4 years of bank records. I went through every transfer I had ever sent home, cross-referencing with my notes, the text from my mother explaining what each amount was for. Hydro, insurance, property tax installment, dad's physiotherapy, prescriptions, mortgage shortfall, groceries. Then I started checking. Some of it was straightforward and matched up exactly the way I'd expect. But I noticed something odd. 3 of the larger transfers, totaling just over $14,000, had been sent to an account number my mother gave me that I had assumed was a shared household account. When I looked more carefully at the routing details I'd saved, that account was not in my parents' names. I contacted my bank. I asked some questions carefully, professionally, the way I would approach anything at work. It took me 2 weeks to confirm what I suspected. That account belonged to Noel. I didn't confront anyone immediately. I've learned, working in compliance, that the worst thing you can do when you discover something like this is react before you have the full picture. So I kept going. I traced as much as I legally could through records I had access to. My own transfers, timestamps, account details I had saved out of habit. I reached out to a colleague who works in personal banking and asked some theoretical questions about how redirection through shared family accounts typically works. I wasn't wrong. Over the course of about a month, I pieced together that somewhere between $7,000 and $15,000 of what I had sent home had been quietly redirected into Noel's account for a vehicle payment, for rent on an apartment he'd moved into without telling me, and for at least one trip that I recognized from the photos he'd posted. I felt sick. Not in the dramatic movie way, in the slow, quiet way. A kind of nausea that sits in your chest for days and doesn't peak, just stays. I went to work. I came home. I made dinner. I ran the numbers again and again. The hardest part wasn't the money. It was the architecture of it. Someone had to have set it up. Someone had to have given me that account number deliberately. I thought about my mother, who always seemed slightly uncomfortable when money came up. I thought about my father, who had asked me to transfer to that account specifically. I thought about Noel, who had never once mentioned any of this, never thanked me, never acknowledged anything. I kept sending small amounts, just enough to not raise suspicion while I decided what to do. The dinner that broke everything open was supposed to be a celebration. Noel had announced through a family group chat that his resale business had landed a major partnership. My parents invited everyone to my aunt and uncle's place in Red Deer for a Saturday dinner. Their house was bigger, better for hosting. My aunt had made her pot roast. My uncle had dug out the good dishes. I drove down that morning. I remember the highway was icy in patches near Ponoka, and the sky had that flat grey February colour that makes everything look like it's waiting for something. I had a folder in a bag in my back seat with printed records. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, just facts. Organised the way I would organise anything at work. When I arrived, Noel was already there, sitting at the kitchen island telling a story that had my father and my uncle laughing. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognise. Clean, expensive looking. He gave me a brief nod when I came in. No hug. No, hello, how was the drive? Dinner was fine on the surface. My aunt's pot roast was excellent. My mother made sure everyone's wine was topped up. Noel held court at his end of the table, talking about his business plans, with the confidence of someone who had never once been told. That confidence requires some proof to back it up. And then my father raised his glass and said, with real pride in his voice, that Noel had always known how to make things happen. He looked at me briefly and said, in a tone that was supposed to be joking, that I could learn something from my brother about taking risks. The table laughed. My aunt smiled politely. My mother looked at her plate. I felt completely calm. I reached into the bag I had set beside my chair and placed a folder on the table next to my father's wine glass. About 15 pages. Bank transfer records, account details, timestamps. Nothing annotated with accusations. Just the data, clean and organized. My father looked at it without touching it. That's where the money went, I said quietly enough that only the people immediately around me could hear. Not the hydro bill, not the prescriptions. My mother picked it up. She started turning pages. Her expression didn't collapse immediately. It shifted slowly, the way ice moves before it cracks. Noel stopped talking. I stood up and looked at my father directly. I've been sending home about $1,000 a month for 4 years, I said. Some of it was for you. I understand that. But a significant portion had ended up in Noel's account, and I'd like to know why. The room went very quiet. My aunt and uncle looked at each other. My father opened his mouth, closed it. Noel said nothing. I hadn't prepared a speech. I had prepared the documents. So I just said one more thing. I'm done sending money until I understand what it was actually used for. I picked up my bag and my coat and walked to the door. My mother called my name once. I turned around. She was still holding the folder, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not guilt, something older and more complicated. I left. The drive back to Edmonton was 3.5 hours. I didn't listen to anything, just the sound of the highway and the wind and the heater and my own thoughts. I kept waiting to feel something large and definitive, relief or grief or satisfaction. What I actually felt was very tired, and underneath that a strange kind of stillness. My phone started ringing before I reached the city limits. My father twice, Noel once. My mother 4 times across 2 hours. I didn't answer. The following week was strange. I went to work. I answered emails. I ate lunch at my desk 3 days out of 5. I had told Patrick, my old roommate, now a close friend, what had happened. And he came over Thursday night with takeout Thai food and didn't say much, which was exactly what I needed. The family call I'd been dreading came on a Sunday afternoon. My mother, this time, and I answered because I decided I was ready. She didn't yell. She cried a little, early in the call, and I waited it out. Then she told me that she hadn't known about the account specifically, that my father had managed the transfers on their end, and she had assumed the account he directed me to was a shared account. She said she didn't know how much had gone to Noel directly. She said she should have looked more carefully. I believed her, not completely, not right away, but mostly. She didn't defend Noel. She didn't defend my father. She just said, after a long silence, I let things happen that I should have stopped. I think I didn't want to see them clearly because I didn't know what I would have to do if I did. That was the most honest thing my mother had ever said to me. It didn't fix anything, but it landed somewhere. My father texted me 9 days after the dinner. One message. You embarrassed this family in front of your aunt and uncle. I expected better from you. I read it twice. Then I replied, I expected better too. We can talk when you're ready to be honest. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. Noel sent me a voice note about 3 weeks later, 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. I listened to the whole thing. He said he had borrowed from the redirected transfers with the intention of paying it back. He said things had been hard for him in ways I didn't understand. He said I had always had it easier because I was good with money. I did not respond to that one. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't anticipated. My father and I were not in contact. Noel and I were not in contact. My mother called every few weeks and we talked, carefully, briefly, like people relearning the shape of a conversation. I started making different choices with my money, not dramatic ones. I booked my car in for the repairs it needed. I rescheduled the dentist appointment I'd cancelled twice. I opened a TFSS and set up automatic contributions, small ones, but consistent. I started cooking actual meals instead of eating whatever was fastest. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't spending mental energy calculating what I could afford to send home at the end of the month. One Saturday in March, I drove out to Elk Island Park by myself and walked along a trail for 2 hours in the cold with nobody's texts coming in and nobody needing anything from me. The light in Alberta in late winter is low and amber and comes sideways through the bare trees in a way that's almost too beautiful to look at directly. I stood next to a frozen pond and thought about all of it. The years of transfers, the dinners, the sighs through phone receivers, the Instagram photos, the folder on the table, the drive home. I thought about the version of myself at 24, who had sent that first payment without hesitating because it had felt like the obvious thing, the right thing, the thing a good son did. He wasn't wrong, that version of me. He just didn't know yet that love given out of fear of disappointing people isn't the same as love freely given. And the people who receive that kind of love often don't know the difference either, which is how things go on the way they did for as long as they did. I don't know what my relationship with my father looks like from here. I don't know about Noel. Those are questions I've put down for now, because I've learned that some things don't have answers yet, and forcing them too early just creates noise. What I know is smaller and more certain. I know that I can look at my bank account without a particular dread settling in my chest. I know that when my phone rings in the evening, I no longer feel a specific kind of bracing before I look at the screen. I know that I slept 9 hours straight on a Wednesday in February, and woke up to nothing urgent and made coffee slowly, and watched the snow outside my window without feeling guilty about it. There's something I've thought about a lot since that dinner. People talk about family loyalty like it's a fixed thing. You have it or you don't, you give it or you withhold it. But I think loyalty is more complicated than that. I was loyal for 4 years. I showed up, I contributed, I absorbed, I kept the peace. The problem was that I confused being needed with being valued, and I let that confusion run for so long that it started to feel like the truth. It wasn't the truth. The people who genuinely love you don't ask you to stay quiet about things that hurt you in order to keep the arrangement comfortable. They don't redirect your effort towards someone else and call it family. And when you finally set something down and say you're done carrying it, they don't respond by talking about embarrassment. I still have the folder, organized neatly, in a drawer in my home office. I don't look at it often. I don't need to. But I keep it there because it represents the first time in my adult life that I trusted what I could see more than what I had been told to feel. That's worth something. I'm still figuring out exactly what.